Sometimes the most powerful moments in life happen when we least expect them. In a world where wealth creates invisible barriers and autism builds silent walls, one magical evening would shatter every assumption about connection, love, and the courage to dance through differences. What happens when a billionaire's carefully controlled world collides with genuine human kindness? The answer lies in the gentle hands of a waitress who saw not disability, but possibility, and in the brave heart of a little girl who just wanted to move to the music like everyone else. This is the story of how one dance changed everything. Richard Sterling stood at the edge of the grand ballroom, his perfectly tailored black suit fitting him like armor against the world he had built around himself. The Crystal Palace Hotel's most exclusive venue sparkled with 1,000 lights, each crystal chandelier casting dancing shadows across marble floors that cost more than most people's homes. Tonight was his company's annual charity gala, an event that brought together the city's most powerful figures under the guise of helping children with special needs. The irony was not lost on him. His fingers drummed against the crystal champagne flute he held, the sound barely audible over the gentle hum of conversation and classical music that floated through the air. At 42, Richard had everything money could buy: a business empire worth billions, properties across 3 continents, and respect from peers who feared his sharp mind and sharper business practices. Yet as he watched the elegant couples gliding across the dance floor, he felt the familiar weight of loneliness that no amount of success could lift. "Mr. Sterling, the photographer from Forbes is here," his assistant Marcus whispered beside him, tablet in hand, and Bluetooth earpiece glowing blue in the dim light. "They want shots of you with the donation check to the Autism Foundation." Richard nodded absently, his eyes scanning the crowd for his daughter. 7-year-old Emma was somewhere in this sea of designer gowns and expensive cologne, probably hiding behind her nanny Sarah as she always did at these events. He had hoped tonight would be different, that maybe the cause close to his heart would make her feel more comfortable, but deep down he knew better. The music shifted to a waltz, and suddenly, the dance floor filled with couples spinning in perfect harmony. Richard watched a grandfather teaching his young granddaughter the steps, both of them laughing as she stepped on his polished shoes. His chest tightened with a pain he rarely allowed himself to feel. When was the last time he had shared such a moment with Emma? When had he last seen her laugh with such abandon? "Sir, should I tell them you'll be ready in 5 minutes?" Marcus pressed, his voice cutting through Richard's thoughts. "Give me 10, Richard replied, finishing his champagne and placing the empty glass on a nearby table adorned with white orchids. He needed to find Emma first, to check on her before the circus of photographs and speeches began. He moved through the crowd with practiced ease, nodding at familiar faces and accepting congratulations on the success of his latest business venture. The mayor shook his hand enthusiastically, praising his generosity. The head of the children's hospital thanked him for his continued support. Yet with each interaction, Richard felt more disconnected from the world around him. The ballroom was divided into several sections, with the main dance floor at the center surrounded by intimate seating areas and cocktail tables. Along one wall, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline, twinkling like stars against the dark sky. Richard remembered how Emma used to press her face against similar windows in his penthouse, fascinated by the lights below. That was before the diagnosis, before everything changed. He found Sarah near the children's area that had been set up in a quieter corner of the ballroom. The space featured comfortable seating, soft lighting, and activities designed to help younger guests feel more at ease. Several children played quietly while their parents mingled nearby, but Emma was not among them. "Where is she?" Richard asked, trying to keep the concern from his voice. Sarah, a kind woman in her 50s who had been with the family for 3 years, looked up from her magazine with apologetic eyes. She was overwhelmed by the music and the crowd, Mr. Sterling. About 20 minutes ago, she wandered toward the service corridor. I've been keeping an eye on the direction she went, but I thought it best to let her have some space to calm down. Richard felt his jaw tighten. This was exactly what he had feared would happen. Emma's autism made social situations incredibly challenging for her, and despite all his money and resources, he still felt helpless when she struggled. "Why didn't you follow her? She does better when she doesn't feel trapped," Sarah explained gently. And the service area is secure. I checked with hotel security. She's safe. Richard nodded, though frustration gnawed at him. He understood the logic, but, as Emma's father, every instinct told him to find her immediately. I'll go get her. The presentations start soon. He made his way toward the service corridor Sarah had indicated, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. The sounds of the party grew muffled as he moved away from the main ballroom, replaced by the quieter hum of hotel operations. The service corridor was a stark contrast to the luxury of the guest areas, functional lighting, plain walls, and the efficient bustle of staff ensuring the evening ran smoothly. As he rounded a corner, Richard paused. Through an open doorway, he could hear something unexpected, laughter. Not the polite, measured laughter of the ballroom, but genuine, delighted giggles that made his heart skip. He followed the sound, finding himself looking into what appeared to be a small staff break room. The scene that greeted him defied everything he thought he knew about his daughter. Emma stood in the center of the room, her emerald green dress, the one she had insisted on wearing because it moves pretty, swirling around her as she attempted what could generously be called dancing. Her movements were uncoordinated and repetitive, the way she always moved when she was happy but didn't know how to express it. But what struck Richard most was her face. Emma was smiling. Not the careful, practiced smile she wore for cameras and family gatherings, but a radiant expression of pure joy. Kneeling beside her was a young black woman in a server's uniform, white shirt, black vest, hair pulled back in a neat bun. She couldn't have been more than 25, with warm brown eyes and an infectious smile that seemed to light up the entire room. She was clapping gently to help Emma find a rhythm, offering encouraging words that Richard couldn't quite hear over the blood rushing in his ears. That's it, sweetheart. Feel the music in your heart. It doesn't matter what it looks like, just let your body move the way it wants to move. Emma giggled again, spinning in a circle that ended with her stumbling slightly. Instead of becoming frustrated as she usually did when she couldn't do something perfectly, she laughed harder and tried again. The young woman laughed with her, her hands ready to steady Emma if needed, but never forcing or correcting her movements. Richard stood frozen in the doorway, afraid to move or speak lest he break whatever magic was happening in that small room. He had spent thousands of dollars on therapists, specialists, and programs designed to help Emma connect with the world around her. He had hired the best nannies, enrolled her in exclusive schools, and provided every accommodation money could buy. Yet here was a complete stranger accomplishing what no professional had managed. She was helping Emma express joy. The young woman noticed his presence first, her eyes widening slightly as she took in his expensive suit and the way he filled the doorway. But she didn't stop encouraging Emma, didn't let her own apparent nervousness interrupt the moment she had created. Emma, she said softly, I think someone's here to see you. Emma turned, and Richard saw her face fall slightly as reality intruded on her private world. The easy smile faded, replaced by the cautious expression she wore around most adults. It broke his heart to realize that included him. Daddy, she said quietly, her hands beginning to flutter near her sides in the self-stimulating behavior that helped her cope with anxiety. I wasn't being bad. I just needed, the music was too loud in there. I know, sweetheart, Richard said, stepping into the room and trying to keep his voice gentle. You're not in trouble. I was worried about you. The young woman rose gracefully from her kneeling position, smoothing down her uniform and offering a respectful nod. Mr. Sterling, I presume? I'm Maya Johnson. I hope it's okay that Emma joined me for a few minutes. She seemed to need some space from the party. Up close, Richard could see that Maya was even younger than he had first thought, probably no more than 23 or 24. There was something about her presence that was both professional and genuinely warm, a combination he rarely encountered in his world. Most people either wanted something from him or were intimidated by his wealth and reputation. Maya seemed to be neither. She was teaching me to dance, Emma announced suddenly, her voice gaining confidence. Maya knows how to dance without rules. Dancing without rules. Richard found himself asking, genuinely curious despite the bizarre nature of the situation. Maya's cheeks flushed slightly, but she met his gaze steadily. I was just telling Emma that dancing is about feeling the music, not about following specific steps. Sometimes the most beautiful dancing comes from the heart, not from technique. Maya dances like I do, Emma added, demonstrating by swaying slightly from side to side. She says it's perfect because it's mine. Richard felt something shift in his chest, a crack in the walls he had built around his emotions. For years, he had watched Emma struggle to fit into a world that seemed determined to correct her natural way of being. Therapists worked to reduce her stymieing behaviors. Teachers encouraged her to make eye contact even when it caused her distress. Well-meaning relatives offered advice about making her more normal. But this young woman, this stranger, had seen Emma's different way of moving as something to celebrate rather than correct. I should probably get back to work, Maya said, glancing at her watch. The dinner service will be starting soon. Wait, Richard found himself saying, though he wasn't sure why. How did you? Emma doesn't usually warm up to people so quickly. Maya looked down at Emma, who had resumed her gentle swaying, lost in her own world of music only she could hear. I have a younger brother with autism. I recognize the signs when someone needs space to just be themselves. The simple statement hit Richard like a physical blow. In all his research, all his consultations with experts, no one had ever put it quite so simply. Emma didn't need to be fixed or trained or made more acceptable to others. She needed space to be herself. Maya makes the music quieter, Emma said suddenly, looking up at both adults. In here, the music doesn't hurt my ears. Richard looked around the break room, noting for the first time how different it felt from the ballroom. The lighting was softer, the sounds muffled. Even the air seemed less charged with tension and expectation. Maya had created a sanctuary without realizing it, a place where Emma could exist without pressure. The party's probably wondering where you both are, Maya said gently, but Richard caught the reluctance in her voice. She didn't want to send Emma back into an environment that clearly caused her stress. Actually, Richard heard himself saying, would you mind staying with Emma for a few more minutes? I need to handle some business obligations, and it seems like she's more comfortable here. Maya looked surprised. Are you sure? I mean, I'm happy to, but I do have work responsibilities. I'll speak to your supervisor, Richard assured her. What's your full name and department? Maya Johnson, banquet serving staff, she replied. But really, Mr. Sterling, you don't need to, please, Richard interrupted, and he realized it was the first time in months he had used that word and meant it. Emma clearly trusts you, and that's not something that happens often. I would consider it a personal favor. Maya looked down at Emma, who had moved closer to her, and was now humming softly while continuing her gentle movements. The decision seemed to make itself. Okay, she said simply. We'll be right here when you're ready. Richard nodded, backing toward the door. As he left the break room, he could hear Emma's voice, clearer and more animated than it had been all evening, asking Maya about her favorite songs. For the first time since arriving at the gala, Richard felt something that might have been peace. The return to the ballroom felt like entering another world. The noise hit him immediately. Conversations, laughter, the clink of glasses, and silverware. How had he never noticed how overwhelming it all was? The photographer was waiting, along with Marcus and several board members who needed his attention for various matters. Richard moved through the required motions of his role as host and philanthropist, but his mind kept drifting back to the break room. He found himself watching the service staff with new attention, wondering about their lives, their families, their struggles. Maya couldn't be making much money working hotel banquets, yet she had given Emma something priceless, acceptance. As he posed for photos with the oversized donation check, Richard made a mental note to find out more about Maya Johnson. Not because he wanted to offer her money or a job, though those thoughts crossed his mind, but because he wanted to understand how a young woman working in hotel service had succeeded where teams of specialists had failed. The irony was profound. He was standing in a room full of people celebrating their charitable contributions to help children with special needs, while just down the hall, one of the hotel servers was doing more for his own special needs child than all their donations combined. Mr. Sterling, the Forbes photographer called out, could we get a shot of you with some of the children the foundation serves? Richard nodded absently, his attention caught by movement near the ballroom entrance. Sarah was standing there, looking concerned and checking her watch. She was probably wondering where Emma had disappeared to for so long. Actually, Richard said to the photographer. Give me just a moment. I need to check on something important. He made his way over to Sarah, who looked relieved to see him. Did you find her? Is she okay? She's more than okay, Richard replied, surprising himself with the warmth in his voice. She's with someone who understands her. We'll continue the photos in a few minutes. Sarah looked puzzled, but nodded. Richard was already walking away, drawn back toward the service corridor like a magnet. He told himself he was just checking on Emma, making sure she was still comfortable. But, if he was being honest, he was curious about the young woman who had accomplished what seemed impossible. As he approached the break room, he could hear voices, Emma's and Maya's, engaged in what sounded like an actual conversation. Not the stilted, one-sided exchanges Emma usually had with adults, but a genuine back-and-forth dialogue. My daddy owns lots of buildings, Emma was saying, her voice carrying a pride Richard rarely heard when she talked about him. That sounds like important work, Maya replied. Buildings give people safe places to live and work. He's really good at it. But sometimes he gets sad because he can't fix me. Richard stopped breathing. He had never heard Emma articulate anything like this, had never realized she understood the weight of his concern for her. Oh, sweetheart, Maya's voice was soft and sure. You're not broken. You don't need fixing. You're just different, and different can be beautiful. That's what you said about dancing. That's right. Some people dance in straight lines. Some people dance and Sir Richard remained in the hallway for several more minutes, listening to the gentle conversation between his daughter and the young woman who had somehow unlocked something in Emma he had never seen before. When he finally returned to the break room, he found them sitting cross-legged on the floor, Emma's expensive dress spread around her like flower petals, completely unconcerned about wrinkles or propriety. Maya was showing Emma how to clap different rhythms, their hands moving in sync as they created patterns of sound that seemed to make perfect sense to both of them. Emma's face was more animated than Richard had seen it in months, her eyes bright with engagement rather than the distant look she usually wore in social situations. Daddy, Emma called out when she noticed him, not getting up, but patting the floor beside her. Maya is teaching me about rhythm. It's like math, but with feeling. Richard hesitated for just a moment before lowering himself to sit on the floor, grateful that his expensive suit was designed to move with him. The gesture seemed to surprise Maya, who had probably never seen a billionaire sitting cross-legged on a break room floor. Like math, but with feeling, Richard repeated, looking at his daughter with new curiosity. Can you show me? Emma's face lit up with the kind of enthusiasm she usually reserved for her special interests, trains, bridges, and the patterns she found in architecture. She began clapping a simple pattern, then nodded to Maya, who added a complementary rhythm. Together, they created something that was indeed mathematical in its precision, but emotional in its impact. See, Daddy? It's not about being perfect. It's about fitting together. The words hit Richard with unexpected force. How many times had he tried to make Emma fit into his world, into society's expectations, instead of finding ways for their worlds to fit together? That's beautiful, he said quietly, and meant it. Maya glanced at her watch and looked apologetic. I really should check in with my supervisor. The dinner service will be starting soon, and I don't want to get into trouble. What time do you get off work? Richard asked, the question surprising all three of them. The gala is scheduled to end at midnight, so probably around 1 in the morning, Maya replied, looking puzzled. Why? Richard wasn't entirely sure why he had asked, but something was forming in his mind, an idea that went against every careful protocol he usually followed. Emma, would you like to see Maya dance properly? Not just the practice we've been doing, but really dance. Emma's eyes widened with excitement. Yes, Maya promised to show me how she dances when nobody's watching. Maya looked between father and daughter, clearly uncertain. I'm not sure what you mean, Mr. Sterling. Richard stood up, brushing off his suit, his mind racing with possibilities. The gala has a live band. They'll be playing for at least another 3 hours. What if we created a different kind of evening? I don't understand, Maya said, though Emma was already bouncing slightly with anticipation. There's a smaller ballroom on the second floor. It's not being used tonight. Richard was thinking out loud now, his business mind already working through the logistics. What if we had our own dance party? Just the three of us. Maya stood up as well, smoothing down her uniform. Mr. Sterling, I appreciate the thought, but I can't just abandon my job. And I'm not sure it would be appropriate. What if it wasn't abandoning your job? Richard interrupted. What if it was a different kind of job? He pulled out his phone and dialed a number from memory. Marcus, it's Richard. I need you to speak with the banquet manager. There's a server named Maya Johnson who I'm reassigning to special private service for the remainder of the evening. Yes, private service. I'll explain later. Make sure she's compensated appropriately for the change in duties. Maya's mouth fell open. Mr. Sterling, you can't just— I can, actually, Richard said, ending the call. And I just did. The question is, are you willing to help Emma have an evening she'll never forget? Emma tugged on Maya's hand. Please, I want to learn to dance like you. The real dancing, not the scared dancing. Scared dancing? Richard asked. When I try to dance like other people want me to, Emma explained matter-of-factly. It makes me feel scared because I'm always doing it wrong. But Maya's dancing isn't wrong. Maya looked down at Emma, then back at Richard, clearly struggling with the unusual situation. This is all very irregular. The best things usually are, Richard found himself saying, surprising himself with the sentiment. Besides, you've already done more for Emma tonight than most people manage in months of trying. Maya was quiet for a long moment, studying both of them. Richard could see her weighing the risks, the job security, the social boundaries, the sheer strangeness of the request. But when she looked at Emma's hopeful face, something in her expression softened. Okay, she said finally. But I have one condition. Name it. If we're going to do this, we do it right. No holding back. No being careful because you're who you are and I'm who I am. Emma deserves to see what dancing really looks like when someone stops worrying about being perfect. Richard extended his hand to her, a gesture of agreement. When Maya shook it, he noticed her grip was firm and confident despite her obvious nervousness about the situation. Deal, he said. Now let's go create some magic. 20 minutes later, Richard found himself in a situation he could never have imagined when the evening began. The Rosewood Ballroom on the hotel's second floor was smaller than the grand ballroom below, but no less elegant, with its own chandelier and polished wooden dance floor. He had called in several favors to arrange for the sound system to be activated and had even managed to get one of the musicians from the main event to come upstairs with his guitar. Emma sat in a chair that had been positioned to give her the best view of the dance floor, her legs swinging with barely contained excitement. She had insisted on keeping her green dress on because it's perfect for watching dancing, and Richard had to admit she looked like a little princess holding court. Maya had changed out of her server's uniform and into a simple black dress she kept in her locker for after-work occasions. It was nothing fancy, probably cost less than Richard spent on coffee in a week, but on her it looked elegant and appropriate for the private ballroom setting. I feel like I should warn you, Maya said as the guitarist tuned his instrument. I'm not a professional dancer or anything. I love to move to music. Show me. Emma called out from her chair, clapping her hands together. Richard settled into a chair beside his daughter, feeling strangely nervous. He had orchestrated million-dollar deals, negotiated with world leaders, and commanded respect from some of the most powerful people on the planet. But watching a young woman prepare to dance for his autistic daughter felt like the most important moment he had experienced in years. The musician, a jazz guitarist named Carlos who seemed to understand the unusual nature of the evening, began playing a soft, melodic piece that filled the ballroom with warm, inviting sound. For a moment, Maya just stood in the center of the dance floor, her eyes closed, letting the music wash over her. Then, she began to move. Richard had seen professional dancing before, ballet performances, Broadway shows, elegant waltzes at charity galas. But what Maya did was something entirely different. Her movements were fluid and natural, as if the music was moving through her rather than her moving to the music. She swayed and stepped and spun with a grace that seemed effortless, but it was the expression on her face that took Richard's breath away. She was completely present in the moment, lost in the joy of movement and music. There was no self-consciousness, no performance anxiety, no concern for how she looked or whether she was doing it right. She was simply dancing, purely and authentically, and it was beautiful. Emma watched with rapt attention, her own body beginning to sway slightly in response to the music and Maya's movements. Richard found himself leaning forward, captivated not just by Maya's dancing, but by his daughter's reaction to it. "She's not thinking about steps," Emma observed, her voice filled with wonder. "She's thinking about the music." Maya heard her and smiled without stopping her movement. "That's exactly right, sweetheart. The music tells my body what to do." "Can I try?" Emma asked, already standing up from her chair. "Of course," Maya said, extending her hand toward Emma. "Come dance with me." What followed was one of the most beautiful and heartbreaking things Richard had ever witnessed. Emma joined Maya on the dance floor, and for a moment she tried to copy Maya's movements exactly, her face tense with concentration. But Maya gently touched her arm and shook her head. "Don't copy me," Maya said softly. "Listen to the music and let it tell you what it wants you to do." Emma closed her eyes, just as Maya had done, and for several seconds she stood perfectly still. Then, slowly, she began to move in her own unique way, rocking slightly from side to side, her hands fluttering near her shoulders, her head tilting as she followed sounds only she could distinguish in the music. Maya matched Emma's movements, not copying them, but complementing them, creating a duet that was unlike anything Richard had ever seen. They moved together and apart, sometimes in sync, sometimes in counterpoint, but always in harmony. Emma's movements, which therapists had tried so hard to modify and control, became part of a beautiful, collaborative dance. "Look, Daddy," Emma called out without stopping her movement. "We're talking with our bodies." Richard felt tears prick at his eyes, a response that shocked him with its intensity. "You're beautiful," he called back, his voice thick with emotion. For the next hour, Emma and Maya explored different ways of moving together. Carlos played various styles of music, jazz, classical, even some contemporary pieces, and each new song brought out different aspects of Emma's natural rhythm and grace. Sometimes Emma danced alone while Maya sat with Richard, explaining what she was seeing in Emma's movements. "She has incredible rhythm," Maya observed as Emma swayed to a particularly complex jazz piece. "And she feels the emotional changes in the music. See how her movements get smaller during the sad parts and bigger during the happy parts? That's sophisticated musical interpretation." Richard watched his daughter with new eyes, seeing not the limitations and challenges that usually dominated his thoughts about her autism, but the unique gifts and perspectives that made her special. "I've been so focused on what she couldn't do that I never really noticed what she could do." Maya nodded understandingly. "My brother went through something similar. It took our family a while to shift from thinking about his autism as something to overcome to thinking about it as just part of who he is. He experiences the world differently, and sometimes that difference is actually an advantage." "How so?" Maya gestured toward Emma, who was now spinning slowly with her arms outstretched, her face tilted toward the chandelier above. "Look at how completely she's experiencing this moment. She's not worried about how she looks or what anyone thinks. She's not thinking about tomorrow's responsibilities or yesterday's mistakes. She's absolutely present in the joy of movement and music." How many adults can do that? Richard considered this, realizing that Maya was right. He spent most of his life thinking about the next deal, the next challenge, the next problem to solve. When was the last time he had been completely present in a moment of pure joy? "Would you like to dance, Mr. Sterling?" Maya asked suddenly. The question caught him off guard. "I'm not much of a dancer." "Neither was I until I decided to stop worrying about being good at it," Maya replied with a smile. "Besides, Emma should see that everyone can dance their own way." Richard hesitated. He had taken ballroom dancing lessons years ago for social occasions, but this felt entirely different. This felt vulnerable and exposed in a way that formal dancing never had. "Come on, Daddy," Emma encouraged, bouncing over to take his hand. "Maya will teach you dancing without rules." Before he could overthink it, Richard found himself on the dance floor with his daughter and the young woman who had already transformed their evening in ways he couldn't have imagined. Carlos began playing a gentle waltz, and Maya showed Richard how to let go of the rigid structure he associated with dancing. "Forget the steps," she instructed gently. "Just move with Emma. Follow her lead." It was awkward at first. Richard was used to being in control, to knowing exactly what was expected and delivering it flawlessly. But Emma's unpredictable movements and Maya's encouragement to stop thinking and start feeling gradually broke down his resistance. Slowly, something shifted. The three of them moved together in the golden light of the ballroom, creating something that was part dance, part conversation, part pure expression of connection. Richard found himself laughing, actually laughing, as Emma spun under his arm, and Maya showed him how to sway in time with the music rather than fighting it. "This is what dancing is supposed to feel like," Emma announced during a quiet moment between songs. "Like we're all part of the same music." Richard looked at his daughter, then at Maya, who was watching both of them with an expression of gentle satisfaction. In the space of a few hours, this young woman had given them something precious, a new way of being together. "Maya," he said as Carlos took a break from playing, "I don't know how to thank you for this." Maya smiled, slightly breathless from the dancing. "You don't need to thank me, Mr. Sterling. This has been amazing for me too. Emma is incredible, and seeing you both discover this together, it's been an honor." Emma had settled into a chair, her cheeks flushed with happiness but clearly getting tired. It was well past her usual bedtime, and Richard realized they should probably head home soon. But he found himself reluctant to end the evening, to return to the world where Emma struggled, and he felt helpless to truly help her. "Maya," Emma said sleepily, "will you teach me more dancing sometime?" Maya glanced at Richard uncertainly. "Well, sweetheart, that would be up to your daddy." Richard felt the weight of decision settling on his shoulders. The evening had been magical, but it had also been completely outside the boundaries of normal life. Maya was a hotel employee, someone from an entirely different world than theirs. It would be complicated, potentially problematic, and definitely unconventional. Then he looked at Emma's hopeful face and remembered the joy he had seen in her tonight. Joy that had nothing to do with expensive therapies or carefully structured interventions, and everything to do with being accepted and celebrated for exactly who she was. "I think that could be arranged," he heard himself saying, and meant it completely. The smile that spread across both Emma's and Maya's faces told him it was the right answer, even if he had no idea what it would lead to. As they prepared to leave the ballroom, Richard took one last look around the space where something fundamental had changed for all of them. Tomorrow, he would be back to being Richard Sterling, billionaire businessman. Emma would return to her structured routine of school and therapy. Maya would go back to serving at hotel events. 3 weeks later, Richard stood in his penthouse office overlooking the city, but his mind was far from the quarterly reports spread across his mahogany desk. Instead, he was thinking about the transformation he had witnessed in Emma since the night of the gala. She had been asking about Maya almost daily, demonstrating the dance moves she remembered, and, most remarkably, showing more confidence in social situations than he had ever seen before. The revelation that had begun in a hotel break room had continued to unfold in unexpected ways. Emma's therapist had noticed the change immediately. Dr. Rebecca Chun, Emma's behavioral specialist, had called just that morning to discuss what she described as a remarkable breakthrough in Emma's self-expression and social engagement. Richard's assistant knocked and entered the office. "Mr. Sterling, Maya Johnson is here for your appointment." Richard felt an unexpected flutter of nervousness. After the gala, he had done what he always did when something captured his business interest. He had researched thoroughly. What he had discovered about Maya had both impressed and humbled him. Maya entered the office wearing a simple navy dress and carrying a small bag, her professional demeanor intact despite the unusual circumstances of their meeting. She looked around the expansive space with its floor-to-ceiling windows and carefully curated art collection, but her expression remained composed. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Richard said, gesturing to the comfortable seating area away from his desk. "I hope I wasn't too mysterious in my invitation." "A little mysterious," Maya admitted with a smile, settling into one of the leather chairs. "But Emma made me promise to come, so here I am." Richard took the chair across from her, noting how she seemed perfectly at ease despite the obvious wealth surrounding them. It was a quality he had come to appreciate about her, an inner confidence that wasn't intimidated by external circumstances. "I'll be direct," Richard began. The night of the gala changed something fundamental for Emma. Her therapists have noticed improvements across multiple areas of development. Her teachers report that she's more engaged in class and more willing to participate in group activities. Most importantly, she's happier, more herself. Maya listened carefully, her hands folded in her lap. I'm glad to hear that. Emma is a remarkable little girl. She is, Richard agreed. And you saw that immediately, in a way that most people miss entirely. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I want to offer you a position. Maya raised an eyebrow. What kind of position? Richard had been thinking about this for weeks, consulting with Emma's therapy team and researching precedents for what he had in mind. I want you to work with Emma, not as a traditional therapist or tutor, but as something new, a movement and creativity coach, if you will. Someone who can help her continue to explore self-expression through dance and music. Maya was quiet for a long moment, processing the offer. Mr. Sterling, I'm flattered, but I'm not qualified for that kind of work. I don't have a degree in special education or therapy. I'm just someone who likes to dance and happen to connect with your daughter. That connection is exactly what makes you qualified, Richard replied. Emma's team of professionals is excellent at what they do, but they all approach her autism as something to be managed or improved. You're the first person who approached her differences as something to be celebrated. Maya shifted in her chair, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. I told you, I have a brother with autism. I learned a different way of thinking about it. Tell me about your brother. Maya's expression softened immediately. Marcus is 19 now, and he's amazing. He struggles with some things, social cues, changes in routine, sensory overload. But he has this incredible gift for seeing patterns and details that other people miss. He's studying computer programming, and he's brilliant at it. What was his childhood like? Difficult, at first, Maya admitted. Our parents didn't understand his needs, and the school system wasn't much help. There were years when everyone was focused on making him normal, instead of helping him be the best version of himself. It wasn't until we found a teacher who understood autism differently that things began to change. Richard leaned forward, genuinely interested. What was different about this teacher? Mrs. Rodriguez saw Marcus's stimming behaviors as self-regulation rather than problems to be stopped. She created sensory breaks instead of trying to force him to sit still. Most importantly, she found ways to use his special interests, patterns, and numbers as bridges to other learning. Maya paused, meeting Richard's eyes directly. She treated his autism as a different way of experiencing the world, not a disorder to be cured. That's exactly what you did with Emma, Richard observed. Maya nodded slowly. I suppose I did. When I saw her moving in her own way, it reminded me of Marcus when he was little. All that energy and joy that people kept trying to redirect or contain. Richard stood and walked to the windows overlooking the city. Maya, I've spent the last 3 years trying to give Emma every advantage money can buy. The best therapists, the most exclusive schools, the latest research-based interventions. And while those things have helped, what you gave her in one evening was something I couldn't purchase at any price. Which was what? Permission to be herself. Complete acceptance of who she is, exactly as she is. Richard turned back to face her. Emma doesn't need someone else to try to fix her. She needs someone who can help her develop her natural gifts and find ways to express herself confidently in the world. Maya was quiet for several minutes, clearly weighing the offer carefully. What would this position actually involve? Richard returned to his chair, pulling out a folder he had prepared. I've been working with Emma's therapy team to design something completely new. We'd like you to spend 3 afternoons a week with Emma, exploring creative movement, music, and self-expression. You'd work closely with her existing therapists, but your focus would be on celebrating and developing her unique strengths rather than addressing her challenges. Maya opened the folder, and her eyes widened at the salary figure listed on the first page. Mr. Sterling, this is more than I make in a year at the hotel. It reflects the value of what you'd be providing, Richard replied. Plus, I'd cover any training or education you wanted to pursue related to the work. Dance therapy, music therapy, autism studies, whatever you think would be helpful. Maya stared at the papers, clearly overwhelmed. I need to think about this. It's a huge change, and I want to make sure I'd actually be helpful rather than just someone who happened to have one good interaction with Emma. Of course, Richard said. Take all the time you need. But I wonder if you might be willing to try a few sessions first? Emma has been asking about you constantly, and I think it would be beneficial for her to see you again, regardless of your decision about the position. Maya looked up from the papers, and Richard could see her resolve wavering. She really has been asking about me? Every day? She's been practicing what she calls Maya dancing, and insisting that everyone in the household learn her interpretation of rhythm patterns. Richard smiled at the memory. Yesterday, she tried to teach our housekeeper how to dance without rules while setting the table. Maya laughed, a warm sound that filled the office. That sounds exactly like something she would do. She has such a generous spirit. Then, you'll consider it? Maya closed the folder, but didn't hand it back. I'll consider it. But I have some conditions if I decide to try a few sessions. Name them. First, Emma has to want to work with me. Not because her father arranged it, but because she genuinely enjoys our time together. Second, I want to meet with her existing therapy team to understand how I can complement their work rather than interfere with it. And third, Maya hesitated. Third, I want you to participate sometimes. Emma lit up when you joined us on the dance floor that night. She needs to see that her father values and enjoys the same things that make her special. Richard felt a familiar tightness in his chest. Maya, I appreciate the sentiment, but I'm not sure I'm cut out for creative expression. That night was an exception, a moment outside normal life. With respect, Mr. Sterling, that's exactly the problem, Maya said gently but firmly. You've created a very structured, professional life for both you and Emma. But she needs to see that there's room for spontaneity, for play, for being silly and imperfect and joyful. She needs to see her father being human. The words hit Richard harder than he expected. He thought about the careful distance he maintained from Emma's daily life, the way he approached even their father-daughter time with the same strategic planning he brought to business deals. I'm not sure I remember how to be spontaneous, he admitted quietly. Maya's expression softened. Then, maybe this could be good for both of you. Emma could help you remember, and you could help her feel confident about being different in a world that often values conformity. Richard considered this, recognizing the truth in her words even as they challenged everything about how he had approached parenting since Emma's diagnosis. You think I've been too careful with her? I think you've been scared, Maya replied with gentle honesty. Scared of her being hurt, scared of not knowing how to help her, scared of doing the wrong thing. But Emma doesn't need you to be perfect. She needs you to be present. The observation was so accurate and so kindly delivered that Richard felt something shift inside him. For 3 years, he had approached Emma's autism like a business problem to be solved, bringing in experts and implementing strategies and measuring outcomes. But maybe what she needed most was simply her father's authentic engagement with who she actually was. All right, he said finally. If you decide to try this, I'll participate. I make no promises about my dancing abilities, but I'll try to be more present. Maya smiled, and Richard realized it was the first completely unguarded smile she had given him. I think that's exactly what Emma needs to see. They spent the next hour discussing practical details. Maya would start with twice-weekly sessions to see how things went. Richard would arrange for her to meet with Dr. Chun and Emma's other therapists to ensure everyone was working toward the same goals. And they would schedule the first session for the following week. As Maya prepared to leave, she paused at the door. Can I ask you something, Mr. Sterling? Richard. And yes, of course. What do you hope this will accomplish? I mean, beyond helping Emma be more confident. What's your real goal here? Richard considered the question carefully. I want Emma to grow up knowing that she's perfect exactly as she is. I want her to feel proud of her differences rather than ashamed of them. And I want to learn how to be the father she deserves rather than the father I think I should be. Maya nodded slowly. Those are good goals. And they're goals we can work on together. After she left, Richard stood at his windows again, looking out at the city but thinking about possibilities he had never considered before. For 3 years, he had focused on preparing Emma for a world that might not understand her. Maybe it was time to focus on celebrating what made her special and helping her find her place in that world as her authentic self. 6 months had passed since that first meeting in Richard's office, and the private dance studio he had built in his penthouse had become the heart of a transformation none of them could have predicted. What had begun as an experiment in creative expression had evolved into something far more profound, a new way of being family. Emma sat cross-legged on the studio's polished floor, carefully arranging colorful scarves and patterns that made sense only to her but were somehow beautiful to everyone who saw them. At 8 years old now, she had grown in confidence and expressiveness in ways that amazed everyone in her life. Her teachers reported breakthrough after breakthrough. Her therapists marveled at her progress, and Richard had learned to see these changes not as victories over her autism, but as Emma coming more fully into herself. Maya entered the studio carrying a small speaker and her ever-present bag of musical instruments and movement props. Over the months, she had indeed pursued additional training in dance therapy and autism support, but the most valuable education had come from Emma herself, who had taught Maya new ways to understand how music and movement could be languages of connection. "Good afternoon, Miss Emma," Maya said with mock formality, a ritual that had developed between them. "Are you ready for our adventure today?" Emma looked up from her scarf patterns with a grin that never failed to warm Maya's heart. "I finished my color song," she announced, pointing to her arrangement. "Each scarf is a different note, and when you put them together, they make a rainbow chord." Maya knelt beside Emma to examine the scarves, each one placed with deliberate intention in a spiral pattern that did indeed seem to flow from one color to the next in perfect harmony. "That's brilliant," Maya said, and meant it. "Should we dance the rainbow chord today?" "Yes, and Daddy said he might join us if his important meeting finishes early." Maya smiled at the casual way Emma mentioned her father's potential participation. 6 months ago, Richard Sterling would never have left a business meeting early to dance with his daughter. Now, it happened regularly, and Emma had come to expect and delight in these moments when her father stepped out of his corporate persona and into their shared world of creative expression. "Well, then, we'd better practice some extra special moves in case he shows up," Maya said, beginning to set up the music system. They had just begun their warm-up movements when the studio door opened and Richard appeared, still in his business suit but with his tie loosened and a smile that transformed his entire demeanor. Emma squealed with delight and ran to him, wrapping her arms around his legs in the enthusiastic hug that had become their standard greeting. "The meeting ended early," Richard announced, returning Emma's hug before looking at Maya over his daughter's head. "I hope you don't mind an extra dancer today." "Never," Maya replied warmly. Emma was just about to show us her rainbow chord dance. Richard had learned to love these moments when he walked into the studio and left his business identity at the door. The space Maya had helped him create was unlike anywhere else in his carefully controlled world. Soft lighting, mirrors that reflected movement rather than status, instruments, and props scattered around with cheerful disorganization that would have driven him crazy anywhere else, but felt perfect here. "Before we dance," Maya said, "I have something to share with both of you." She pulled an official-looking letter from her bag, her expression mixing excitement with nervousness. Richard and Emma gathered around as she unfolded the document. "I've been accepted into a graduate program in expressive arts therapy," Maya announced. "It's specifically designed for people who want to work with children with special needs, using creative arts as therapeutic tools." Emma clapped her hands together, not fully understanding the implications but picking up on the excitement in Maya's voice. Richard, however, immediately grasped what this might mean. "Congratulations," he said sincerely, though his stomach dropped with the fear that this success might take Maya away from them. "That's a tremendous achievement. Where's the program?" "That's the wonderful part," Maya said, her smile growing broader. "It's here in the city. The university has a partnership with the Children's Hospital, and they're actually interested in the work we've been doing with Emma as a case study for their research." Richard felt relief flood through him, followed immediately by pride. "They want to study what you've accomplished with Emma?" Maya nodded, but her expression became more serious. "Which brings me to something I need to discuss with both of you. The program director would like to observe some of our sessions and eventually interview Emma and you about the experience. It would be completely confidential, and you'd have final approval on anything that gets published, but they think our approach could help other families." Emma looked between the two adults, picking up on the gravity of the conversation even if she didn't understand all the details. "Would other kids get to learn Maya dancing?" she asked. "That's exactly what they hope," Maya replied. "But only if you and your daddy are comfortable sharing what we do here." Richard found himself considering not just the immediate question, but the larger implications of what had happened over the past months. What had begun as a private solution for his daughter had indeed become something that could benefit other families struggling with similar challenges. What would it involve, he asked. Maya explained the research proposal, periodic observations of their sessions, interviews about the process and outcomes, and potentially presenting their approach at conferences focused on innovative autism therapies. Throughout her explanation, Richard watched Emma's face, noting her increasing excitement rather than anxiety about the prospect of sharing their experience. "I think we should do it," Emma said when Maya finished. "Other kids should get to feel happy like I do when we dance." The simple statement hit Richard with its profound generosity. His daughter, who had struggled for years to find her place in a world that often seemed determined to change her, was eager to help other children discover their own paths to confidence and self-expression. "If you're sure, Emma, then I'm in favor of it too," Richard said. "But, Maya, this means even more pressure on you. Graduate school, research participation, and continuing to work with Emma, that's a lot." Maya had clearly thought about this. Actually, the timing works perfectly. The program encourages students to maintain ongoing therapeutic relationships during their studies, and Emma would be my primary case study. Plus, the university is offering me a full scholarship based on the preliminary work I've already done here. Richard felt a surge of pride that surprised him with its intensity. Over the months of working together, he had come to see Maya not just as someone who helped his daughter, but as a remarkable young woman whose insights and approach deserved much wider recognition. "There's something else," Maya continued, looking slightly nervous again. "The program director asked if I thought you might be interested in co-presenting at some of the conferences. As the parent perspective on this approach, public speaking?" Richard asked, his business mind immediately cataloging the potential professional implications. "About Emma's autism?" Maya nodded. "About what it's like to shift from trying to fix differences to celebrating them. About learning to dance without rules, literally and metaphorically." Emma tugged on Richard's sleeve. "Daddy, you could tell other daddies how to dance with their kids." The image Emma painted was both terrifying and deeply appealing. Richard had spent his career speaking to rooms full of powerful people about business strategies and market analyses. The idea of speaking about something so personal, so vulnerable, felt entirely different. But as he looked around the studio that had become such a center of joy in their lives, at the daughter who had blossomed in ways he never could have imagined, and at the young woman who had made it all possible, Richard realized that sharing this story felt like a responsibility as much as an opportunity. "I'd be honored to participate," he said finally, "if you think my perspective would be helpful." Maya's smile was radiant. "I think your perspective is essential. This isn't just about innovative therapy techniques. It's about families learning new ways to connect across differences." Emma had been listening to this adult conversation with the patient attention she had developed over months of being included in decisions about her own life. Now she clapped her hands together in the gesture that always signaled her readiness to move on to action. "Can we practice our presentation dance now?" she asked, making all three of them laugh. "Presentation dance?" Richard asked. "For when you tell other people about Maya dancing." Emma explained as if it were obvious. "We need to show them what it looks like." And so they did. For the next hour, the billionaire businessman, the graduate student, and the 8-year-old with autism created movements that told the story of their journey together. There was no choreography, no planned sequence of steps. Instead, they let the music and their own understanding of each other guide them through a dance that was part celebration, part demonstration, and part pure joy. Richard found himself moving with a freedom he never would have believed possible 6 months earlier. His expensive suit jacket came off, his careful posture relaxed into something more natural, and his movements became responses to his daughter's lead rather than attempts to direct her. Maya watched them both with the satisfaction of someone who had helped create something beautiful and lasting. Emma's confidence in her own body and movements had grown exponentially, but Equally important was the change in how Richard related to his daughter's differences. He no longer saw her autism as something to overcome, but as a different way of experiencing the world that brought its own gifts and perspectives. "Stop," Emma called out suddenly, in the middle of a particularly joyful sequence. "I want to remember this exactly." The three of them froze in place, Richard with one arm raised mid-gesture, Maya balanced on one foot with her arms creating graceful curves, Emma spinning with her face tilted toward the ceiling lights. For a moment, they held the tableau like a photograph capturing pure happiness. "Now I'll always remember what it feels like to dance with my family," Emma announced, relaxing back in a normal posture. Richard felt something catch in his throat at her use of the word family. Over the months, Maya had indeed become family in all the ways that mattered, not through formal adoption or legal arrangements, but through shared love for Emma and commitment to helping her thrive. "Maya," Richard said as they began to wind down the session, "there's something I want to discuss with you about the future." Maya looked attentive but curious. Over their time working together, these conversations had led to everything from expanded therapy approaches to the studio renovation to Maya's graduate school applications. "I've been thinking about what happens after you finish your graduate program," Richard continued. "And I'd like to propose something that might sound crazy." "I'm listening," Maya said, settling cross-legged on the floor beside Emma, who was reorganizing her colorful scarves. "I want to fund a research center focused on expressive arts therapy for children with autism and other developmental differences. Something that could train other therapists in the approach you've developed, conduct research on creative interventions, and provide services to families who can't afford private therapy." Maya stared at him for a long moment, clearly processing the scope of what he was suggesting. That would be incredible, but also enormous." "I have resources," Richard said simply. "And after watching what you've accomplished with Emma, I can't think of a better way to use them. The question is whether you'd be interested in directing such a center once you finish your degree." Emma looked up from her scarves, sensing the importance of the conversation. "Would Maya be my teacher forever?" she asked. "If she wants to be," Richard replied, looking at Maya. "And if she's willing to teach lots of other families too." Maya was quiet for several minutes, clearly overwhelmed by the magnitude of the opportunity. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'd like to do that. But with one condition." "Name it." 2 years later, Richard stood in the lobby of the Sterling Center for Expressive Arts Therapy, watching families arrive for the monthly community dance celebration. The building, a converted warehouse in the arts district, buzzed with excited energy as children with various developmental differences and their families prepared for an evening of music, movement, and connection. The space Maya had designed with input from Emma and other children was unlike any therapeutic facility Richard had ever seen. Instead of sterile clinical rooms, there were studios with soaring ceilings and natural light, sensory spaces filled with soft textures and calming colors, and community areas where families could gather informally to share experiences and support each other. Emma, now 10 years old and serving as the center's unofficial junior ambassador, moved through the crowd with a confidence that still amazed Richard. She wore a flowing purple dress that she had specifically chosen because it made the best swishing sounds when dancing, and her hair was decorated with small bells that chimed softly as she moved. "Daddy, Mrs. Chen wants to know if you're ready for the welcome presentation," Emma said, appearing at his elbow with the direct communication style she had maintained as she grew older. Dr. Rebecca Chun, now the center's clinical director, had been instrumental in developing the research protocols that were already showing remarkable results. Children who participated in the center's programs showed improvements not just in self-expression and social engagement, but in overall emotional regulation and family satisfaction. "Almost ready," Richard replied, straightening his tie. Even after 2 years of regular public speaking about the center's work, he still felt nervous before presentations. But it was a different kind of nervousness than he had known in his business life. This felt personal, vulnerable, and infinitely more important. Maya appeared from one of the studios, having finished the final setup for the evening's activities. She wore a simple black dress with comfortable shoes suitable for dancing, and her hair was pulled back in the practical style she favored for working sessions. At 27, she had grown into her role as the center's founder and director with a grace and wisdom that impressed everyone who worked with her. "We have about 40 families here tonight," she reported, consulting her tablet, "including several who are visiting from other cities to learn about our approach. The journalists from the Washington Post are set up in the observation area, and the university documentary crew has their equipment ready." Richard nodded, still adjusting to the level of attention the center had garnered since their research findings had been published in several major journals. What had begun as a private solution for one family had become a model that therapists and researchers around the world were studying and adapting. "How are our presenters feeling?" Richard asked, referring to the 3 families who would be sharing their experiences with the center's programs during the evening's formal presentation. "Nervous but excited," Maya replied. "The Martinez family particularly wants to talk about how their approach to their son's stimming behaviors has completely changed since they started coming here." Emma had wandered over to greet new arrivals, and Richard watched her natural ease in welcoming other children who might be feeling overwhelmed by the crowd and activity. She had an intuitive understanding of sensory needs and social anxieties that made her incredibly effective at helping newcomers feel comfortable. "Mr. Sterling?" A young mother approached hesitantly, carrying a 3-year-old boy who was covering his ears against the ambient noise. "I'm Sarah Williams. We're here for the first time, and I wondered." "Of course," Richard said immediately, recognizing the uncertainty and hope in her expression that he remembered so well from his own early days of seeking help for Emma. "Maya, could you?" But Maya was already moving toward them, her warm smile and calm presence immediately apparent. "Sarah, we spoke on the phone, and this must be James." The little boy peeked out from behind his hands, his dark eyes taking in Maya's gentle demeanor. Without being asked, Emma appeared beside them, producing a pair of soft, noise-reducing headphones from seemingly nowhere. "These helped me when I was little," Emma told James matter-of-factly. "The sounds get less scary with these." Richard watched the interaction with the same wonder he felt every time he saw Emma's natural empathy in action. She had grown from a child who struggled with social connections into someone who instinctively knew how to help other children navigate similar challenges. The evening's program began with what they called free movement time, an opportunity for families to explore the studios and activities at their own pace. Richard moved through the spaces, observing the careful balance Maya and her team had struck between structure and freedom. In one studio, a music therapist was helping a nonverbal teenage girl express emotions through drumming, her parents watching in amazement as their daughter created complex rhythms that told stories words couldn't convey. In another space, siblings were learning adaptive dance moves that included their brother with cerebral palsy as an equal partner rather than someone who needed special accommodation. The sensory room, Emma's personal favorite design contribution, provided a quiet retreat for children who needed a break from social interaction. Beanbag chairs, weighted blankets, and soft lighting created a space where overwhelm could be processed without shame or urgency to rejoin group activities. "It's remarkable, isn't it?" Dr. Chin appeared beside Richard as he observed a father learning to communicate with his autistic daughter through movement rather than words. 6 months ago, that family was considering residential placement because they felt so disconnected from their daughter. Now look at them. Richard did look, seeing the obvious joy and connection between father and daughter as they created their own simple choreography together. Maya's approach of working with whole families rather than just the children has been transformative. Your willingness to be vulnerable about your own learning process has been equally important, Dr. Chin observed. When parents see a successful businessman talking openly about having to change his fundamental assumptions about his daughter's needs, it gives them permission to question their own approaches. The formal presentation began at 8 o'clock, with Richard, Maya, and Emma taking the small stage that had been set up in the main community space. Emma had insisted on participating in these presentations, arguing that other children needed to hear directly from kids who had been through the program. "Good evening, everyone," Richard began, looking out at the mixed audience of families, researchers, journalists, and other professionals. 2.5 years ago, I thought I knew what my daughter Emma needed to be successful in the world. I was wrong about almost everything. The audience chuckled knowingly, particularly the parents who had their own stories of well-intentioned but misguided early interventions. Emma, would you like to tell everyone what you've learned here? Emma stepped forward to the microphone with the confidence she had developed through dozens of these presentations. I learned that being different isn't something to fix, she said clearly. It's something to understand and celebrate. And I learned that when families learn to communicate in new ways, everyone gets happier. She gestured to Maya, who joined her at the microphone. Maya taught my daddy and me that we could connect through movement and music, not just words. But the most important thing she taught us was that my autism isn't something separate from who I am. It's part of what makes me special. Maya took the microphone, her voice warm and professional. What we've discovered through our work here is that when we shift from trying to normalize differences to celebrating and accommodating them, entire family systems become healthier. Children develop stronger self-advocacy skills, parents experience less stress and guilt, and siblings learn valuable lessons about diversity and inclusion. The presentation continued with video footage of families working in the studios, testimonials from parents about changes they had seen not just in their children but in themselves, and data showing measurable improvements in family functioning and child development outcomes. But the most powerful moment came when Emma invited James, the 3-year-old who had arrived that evening wearing noise-reducing headphones, to join her on stage. James learned something tonight, Emma announced. Do you want to show everyone your new dance, James? The little boy, who had been overwhelmed by the crowd just hours earlier, stepped onto the stage and began the simple swaying movement that Emma had taught him during free movement time. It was barely recognizable as dancing to most observers, but Emma clapped enthusiastically and began moving in harmony with his rhythm. See, Emma said into the microphone as they swayed together. James dances exactly the way he's supposed to dance. And now his mommy knows that too. Sarah Williams, James's mother, had tears streaming down her face as she watched her son moving confidently on stage, celebrated for his unique way of being rather than corrected for his differences. After the formal presentation ended, the evening continued with the community dance celebration. Families spread out across the various studios, and music filled the building as children and adults explored movement together. Richard found himself in the main studio with Emma and Maya, surrounded by families they had come to know well over the months and others who were experiencing this approach for the first time. The music was a blend of classical, jazz, and contemporary pieces that Maya had carefully selected for their emotional range and rhythmic variety. Emma was in her element, moving between different groups and helping facilitate connections between children who might otherwise struggle to interact. Richard watched her guide a shy 6-year-old into a simple call-and response clapping game, then immediately shift to help a teenager with Down syndrome feel included in a small group, creating collaborative choreography. She's going to be an incredible therapist someday, Maya observed, following Richard's gaze as Emma naturally accommodated each child's communication style and sensory needs. If that's what she chooses, Richard replied. But, honestly, I'm just amazed by who she's becoming. The confidence, the empathy, the way she sees strength in everyone's differences, that's beyond anything I could have hoped for when we started this journey. Maya nodded, then looked around the studio at the dozens of families engaging with each other through movement and music. Sometimes I can hardly believe this all started with one dance in a hotel break room. The best things usually have simple beginnings, Richard said, taking Maya's hand and Emma's hand as the music shifted to a slower, more contemplative piece. Ready for our family dance. It had become their tradition to end these community celebrations with what they called their family dance, a few minutes of movement that belonged just to the 3 of them, a reminder of the private connection that had grown into this public mission. As they moved together in the center of the studio, other families gradually joined them, creating expanding circles of connection that filled the entire space. Children who had never met were moving in harmony. Parents were learning new ways to communicate with their kids, and siblings were discovering that differences could be bridges rather than barriers. Emma spun under Richard's raised arm, her dress swirling and bells chiming. before moving to create a complex pattern with Maya that seemed to incorporate elements from every style of movement they had explored together over the years. Richard followed their lead, his own movements now natural and responsive rather than self-conscious or hesitant. "Look, Daddy," Emma said as the music began to fade. "Everyone is dancing without rules." Richard looked around the studio and saw exactly what Emma meant. No two families were moving in exactly the same way, but everyone was engaged, connected, and joyful. Parents who had arrived feeling overwhelmed by their children's differences were leaving with new tools for connection and celebration. Children who had struggled to find their place in traditional social environments were discovering that they belonged exactly as they were. And families who had felt isolated by their unique challenges were finding community with others who understood their journey. As the evening wound down and families began to leave, Richard, Maya, and Emma stood together in the lobby, saying goodbyes and making plans for future sessions. The building gradually quieted, but the energy of connection and possibility that had filled it remained. "Next month, we're expecting families from 6 different states," Maya reported, checking her messages. "And the foundation in Australia wants to send a delegation to observe our family training protocols." Richard smiled, still amazed by how far their simple discovery had traveled. "Are you ready for that level of expansion?" "We'll grow as we need to," Maya replied. "But always with Emma's principle at the center." "Which principle is that?" Richard asked, though he suspected he knew. Emma looked up at both. "The center has to include training for parents and families, not just therapists. What happened here didn't work because of me alone. It worked because you were willing to change how you thought about Emma's differences and your role as her father. Other parents need that opportunity too." Richard nodded, recognizing the wisdom in her condition. "A family-centered approach. I like that." Emma had been listening with the serious attention she gave to important conversations, and now she stood up with the decisive movement that meant she was ready to contribute. "I want to help teach the other kids," she announced. "I know how to be different in a good way now." Looking at his daughter, confident, expressive, proud of who she was, Richard realized that the transformation that had begun 6 months earlier was far from complete. Emma's growth had changed him, Maya's perspective had changed their family, and now they had the opportunity to change other families' lives as well. The dance they had begun in a hotel break room was becoming something much larger, a movement that could spread far beyond their private studio and touch lives they might never know. And at the center of it all was a little girl who had learned that being different wasn't something to hide or fix, but something to celebrate and share with the world. "I think," Richard said, looking at both of them, "we're going to need a bigger dance floor." His phone buzzed with a text from Emma's nanny. "Emma drew you a picture of 3 people dancing. She says it's her, you, and Maya at the happiness party. She wants to hang it in your office." Richard smiled, imagining his daughter's artwork hanging among the serious business credentials and awards that currently decorated his walls. The idea of mixing her joyful, unstructured creativity with his carefully organized professional space felt both terrifying and exactly right. Maybe learning to dance without rules was going to change more than just their Thursday afternoons. Maybe it was going to change everything about how they moved through the world together. He was surprised to discover that the prospect didn't scare him nearly as much as he thought it would. In fact, it felt like the beginning of something beautiful. But tonight had proven that transformation was possible, that connection could happen in the most unexpected ways, and that sometimes the most profound lessons came from the most unlikely teachers. The evening was far from over, and Richard had the distinct feeling that the real changes were just beginning. Urkels, some people dance by swaying back and forth. They're all perfect ways to dance. Richard found himself leaning against the wall outside the break room, his eyes closed as he processed what he was hearing. In less than an hour, Maya had given Emma something he had been trying to provide for years, the message that she was perfect exactly as she was. When he opened his eyes, he realized that nothing about this evening was going to go according to plan. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, that felt like exactly what needed to happen.